really hope that this will be an exciting event. Marcus Peterson and I have worked very hard to try and provide a panel that is as diverse as possible to deal with a really important issue in our community. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator, A.W. King, who's going to take the show away from me.
So, hi. That's okay. Hi, can everyone hear me? I'm A.W. Lee, and I'll just be the timekeeper and moderator of the event today. And we wanted to start off with the traditional land acknowledgements. We'd like to acknowledge these unceded, occupied territories on which we gather today. Part of the traditional territory of many nations, the Huron-Wendat, the Petun First Nation, the Seneca, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, including most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit, who were forcibly removed from this land they call home in the mid-19th century. The land was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and Confederacy of Anishinaabe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this territory. Acknowledgement of this factual history and the struggles of those who have fought against colonialism and provided the precedent for settlers to continue with their own decolonization work is obligatory to be in solidarity with Indigenous peoples. This theft is just one contributory part of the comprehensive and intentional process of genocidal colonization and theft of knowledge from Indigenous nations of Turtle Island that continues to benefit settlers today. We can never work to end systemic institutional violence if we do not center the narratives of Indigenous peoples in our collective decision-making for social justice and equity. It is the responsibility of settlers to acknowledge their complicity with this history of violence and coercion that led to the establishment of this city and this country. And I'd like to introduce Courtney Boost, Public Programs Coordinator for Museum of Toronto, to say a few words.
Hi everyone, very quickly. My name is Courtney Boost, as PW kindly said. I just want to thank you all for coming today, and just let you know that this event is part of many events taking place throughout the month of March as part of Museum of Intersections. So I would really appreciate it if you would take a moment after the event to flip through our festival guide. And thank you to Marcus and Jeffrey, for all your hard work, and everyone who has helped out today, and the 519. So thank you.
Great, and so I will have to continue to read off this script because Jeffrey and Marcus asked me to moderate this script. So, in the wake of Project Marie, the hashtag Black Lives Matter protests and police changes to Pride Toronto, our objective is to investigate the history, current state, and future envisioning of the relationships between LGBTQ communities and the police since Operation started. With so many conversations happening online, on the streets, in workplaces, and in homes, we thought it would be beneficial to have those conversations take place in a public setting and put them into an historical context. We would like to especially focus on solutions-based discussions, how we can work together and in what direction. The suggested questions, which the panelists will address, are found at your tables and are as follows. What have been your own personal experiences with police and the justice system? How do we address criminalization and targeted policing of most members of our communities? For example, Black, Indigenous people of color, women, immigrants, people living with HIV, prisoners, trans folks, two-spirited people, gender non-conforming people, sex workers, street folks, addicts, Muslims, etc. What's the most effective way to move forward in addressing this relationship while keeping all members of our communities safe? Are there existing examples or models that we can draw upon? With what should we do with our collective wisdom? Thank yous and acknowledgements. The organizers would like to thank for their generosity and support the 519 Centre for donating this space, Museum of Toronto, for funding the project, the Canadian Lesbian and Gay Archives, Live Aid Bookshop, and the Toronto Storytelling Festival. And some housekeeping points, the explanation of the agenda is we're going to start with the panelists, and then we're going to concentrate at tables in a World Cafe style conversation, little break, and then we'll reconvene after that. So the bathrooms are through the doors across the hall, around the corner, including an all-gender bathroom, and the refreshments are over there in the corner. And please use the Twitter hashtags, #MyZMX and #NoMoreShit if you'd like to follow along on your phones. And I will ask the audience to please hold all questions until the World Cafe period when you can address them at your tables. Oh yeah, and there will be videographers as well as a photographer from my museum, live streaming it on Facebook and taking photos throughout the day. And if you'd like to, so the cameras right now are pointed at us, but if you'd like to excuse yourself from that, please let one of the organizers, Jeffrey or Marcus, know. Okay. Turning, and I would like to introduce Dr. Tom Hooper, who recently completed his PhD in history at York University. His dissertation is on the Right to Privacy Committee in the 1981 Bathhouse Raids. He's recently been published with the Torontoist and ActiveHistory.ca on the history of policing park sex in Toronto. Please.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. That Torontoist article is coming out soon. It was supposed to come out last week, before I wrote that. So thank you to the organizers for inviting me here. Thank you to all of you for coming. I want to start with this series of questions that we've been given, as I think it's going to help get me through the points that I've prepared here today. So the first question, what have been your own personal experiences with police and the justice system? Well, I guess that means we're going to start by talking about my own privilege and what that means. Because I can see the police and the justice system not as a tool of oppression, but rather as a tool to assert my rights and protect my property. I have that privilege. When I have had experiences with police, they have been polite, courteous, respectful, and most of all, I felt safe. In one instance, I was pulled over and the cop quickly approached my window. Asked, "Were you wearing your seatbelt back there?" I answered, "Yes, I was." He replied, "Okay, sorry, have a nice day." And that was the end of the interaction. All of my encounters with police have been similar. Yet I know from paying attention that there is a problem. I can see what has happened 2 blocks south of the village, where police violence against a person of color was combined with a disgusting comment about AIDS, with no accountability. But some gay white men, if we pay attention to this conversation online since Black Lives Matter and the Pride Parade last summer, they seem to need more proof than this. Now, I learned a lot about police-queer relations in researching the bath raids, but my first real-life wake-up call to my own privilege was when I was in grad school. I was visiting my colleague Funke Aladejebi at her home in Scarborough, and after a lovely dinner, she offered to drive me to the subway. On our way, we were passed by a police cruiser, who quickly swung around and pulled us over. The officer's demeanor was completely different from anything I have ever seen. They approached the car slowly, with suspicion. They were rude, and they were condescending. I asked Funke after this interaction if this was normal. She answered, "This happens all the time." This was a wake-up call for me, and suddenly some of this history that I'm about to share with you took on a new meaning. So the organizers of this event asked another question. I'm skipping the middle two. But the question is, what should we do with our collective wisdom? And what I've been talking about here in regards to privilege is actually our collective ignorance, our collective forgetting. There was once a time in the history of our city where white gay men like myself had a lived experience where we understood what was happening with people of color and the police. Through systems of white supremacy, white gay men have seen improvement over the last 36 years, where other communities in our city have not. The quote-unquote queer community includes a diversity of races, yet for some white gay men, this isn't enough to be critical of the police. So today, I'm going to offer some instances where, in the context of the history of the Bath Raids, non-white gay men stood in solidarity with white gay men. I believe this will inform the remaining two questions asked, namely, how this relates to the experiences of queer people of color, and how do we go forward from here. I believe part of the answer to confront this privilege is by reminding our members of our community of our intersectional past. So I'm going to begin with the 1978 raid on the Barracks Bathhouse, and I'm going to talk about lesbian solidarity. So the 1981 Bathhouse raids were huge. 200 cops raided 4 gay bathhouses all at once. 306 men were arrested and charged under the Bathhouse law. And this resulted in a massive community response that we're familiar with. What we don't realize is this was part of a series of raids, a whole bunch of different police campaigns against our community. The first bath raid in Toronto was on December 9th, 1978, where 20 police agents raided the Barracks Bathhouse and arrested 23 men. Despite several contentious issues between lesbians and gay men at this time, the community rallied together. Activist and academic Mariana Valverde gave a speech at a rally a few days after the raid, and she declared an attack on any gay establishment is an attack on the whole gay community, and that includes lesbians. A flyer distributed by lesbians during the rally stated, "When we defend our brothers, we defend ourselves as well." We need to remember that in the most crucial moments of this history, queer women raised their voices in solidarity with gay men. It was lesbian activist Chris Birchall who initiated the infamous chant on February 6, 1981, "No more shit." Now, after the 1978 Barracks raid, a new group was formed. They called themselves the December 9 Defense Fund. And this group later changed their name to the Right to Privacy Committee. One of the first major confrontations between this group and the police was regarding 2 articles in the Toronto Police Association newsletter, News and Views. The first article was by retired Staff Sergeant Ken Peglar, who contributed to a regular column called Pensioners News. One particular article in December 1978 was nothing more than a series of diatribes and racist non sequiturs. In this article, he started with sexism. "Women's lib is still hard at it," he said. "Females are still clamoring to be garbage collectors and telephone line persons and grease monkeys." This is in the Toronto Police Association newsletter. Of Toronto queers, he surmised, "Homo and bi and trans and all kinds of sexuals are not slacking off one bit. I suppose if you're not one, it's pretty hard to get into it." But most of this article was saved for his racist outrage. He said, "I think it's about time somebody did something to protect us WASPs from all these other ethnic groups in Metro. After all, we're a minority group now." He targeted Italians and Polish groups. "The west side of Dufferin and Lawrence," he said, "is dominated by Italian Roman Catholics. Now that they've elected a Polish pope, we can look to lots of cooperation between the communists and the Vatican. They both have the same ambition, world domination." He continued, "And if you want to laugh, drive over to Glencairn and Bathurst and see the Jews, their Oldsmobiles. It's better than a Frank Sinatra special." He concluded with the idea that WASPs were losing because, quote, "blacks and Jews seldom think about anything except their color or their religion." The second article in March 1979 in News and Views was by then current Staff Sergeant Tom Mulcair, not to be confused with NDP leader Tom Mulcair. Yeah, that's good, that's perfect. Great name. The article was entitled "The Homosexual Fad." And this was nothing more than a 2-page diatribe against everything queer. He attacked Mayor John Sewell, he attacked the body politic, he attacked Pierre Trudeau, but most of all, it was pure hate. So I'll just give you a sample of the article, which I think best sums up this hate. He offers a solution to this homosexual fad. Quote, "The one thing that can turn a homosexual into a patient is social rejection and disapproval. This might mean a little suffering, but pain is sometimes good because it signifies disorder and disease. Nobody knows himself until he has suffered. It's a hard law, but a supreme law. Stilling pain without treating the disorder can be deadly. This type of disorder seems to be clearly infectious. So when these two articles came to light in March 1979, the Right to Privacy Committee mobilized to respond. Part of this response was for the Right to Privacy Committee, these gay white men, to join efforts with Black community leaders and other activists to form a group called the Working Group on Police-Minority Relations. This group was led by former Commissioner of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, Bromley Armstrong. The Working Group and the Right to Privacy Committee worked together to submit official complaints over these two articles. There was no disciplinary action taken against either Ken Peglar or Thomas Mulcair. In fact, Mulcair's past record was praised by the chief in the course of this incident. Instead, the chief issued a declaration of concern and intent. It's a good police title for you. And this condemned racist discrimination, but refused to mention the issue of sexuality or the queer community at all. But Bromley Armstrong and the Working Group on Police-Minority Relations stood in solidarity with the Right to Privacy Committee and rejected this declaration of concern and intent because this was missing. So the RTPC and the Working Group, as well as the activist connections made between the Black community and the white-dominated gay organizations, were essential in the resistance to the police leading up to the 1981 Bathhouse Raids. So part of my answer to where do we go from here includes confronting this white gay privilege in our community by simply remembering these stories of the past when non-white gay men stood up for us. I'll leave it there. In the question time, I have two more samples from this time period, so ask me about them. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. And so our next panelist is Arsham Parsi, an Iranian LGBT human rights activist who provides services for Iranian queer asylum cases while he himself lives here in exile. He is the founder and head of the Iranian Railroad for Queer Refugees, or IRQR. He was asked to speak at the second session of the United Nations Human Rights Council and is one of two Iranians selected to be featured in two galleries in the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. So welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for the organizers who invited me. And do I need a microphone? Or?
Yes.
Okay. I'm from Shiraz in Iran, and we're famous to become lazy, so holding microphones is a kind of thing. And my name is Arsham Parsi, and I'm the executive director of the Iranian Railroad for Queer Refugees, which is, we became registered charity in last August, and we provide support to Iranian LGBT refugees. Not only Iranians, because this became a charity, we help Afghan, Syrian, people from Iraq, and other basically Middle Eastern people who escape their country of origin and seeking asylum on the basis of their sexual orientation and or gender identity. My perspective for these questions and panel is totally different, because when I was reading the questions that how was my experience with police here and discriminations, at the first I was like, I don't have any problem with the police, and I really, really appreciate it, and they're such a great people, because I compare policing here with police in Iran. Police in Iran, whenever we pulled over, whenever they stop us, to check our card, it means that you're going. If you're lucky, you're going to detention center. Otherwise, it's prison. Because whenever we see police in Iran, it means we're in trouble. But here, whenever we see police, it means that we're safe. It takes, several years for me to find out the expectations that people have here from the police, and they criticize them, they protest, it's different. They're practicing their rights, but in Iran, never ever were able to criticize police and ask them that this is not an acceptable behavior, because again, it's become another issue like prison or lashing and other method of punishment, because technically we couldn't criticize it. But I would like to approach something more than police and discrimination, and apply to the governments and how, because our area of expertise is for refugees and people who come to safe countries like Canada and the United States. Sometimes they are being judged, sometimes they are being discriminated, and maybe it's not very visible, but when you think at it, when you look at it, you can find there is a kind of systematic behavior. For example, one example, if they are two gay men living together and being partner and couple, because they're not married, because in Iran or in Turkey we don't have gay marriage, but they live together for 5-6 years. When they want to apply for asylum and coming to Canada, they are not being recognized as a couple. They have to apply as two individual applicants, and they don't process them. Usually they're not at the same time, they're not being interviewed or other application process. At the first, I thought that it's going to be a normal practice because technically they're not married. But when last 2 years the Syrian refugee crisis happened, I felt so upset because I just talked to one of my friends here that when the Canadian government announced that Syrian families, they have priority over single individuals, it was kind of why? Because if I was a single gay man and you don't recognize, or even if I have a partner, but you don't recognize me as a family, so I'm not in a priority, because basically I don't have a wife, I don't have a child, and so I'm not important. I'm not saying that those Syrian refugees and their families are not important as well. Yes, but I believe that saving someone shouldn't mean to hold someone else's life. We cannot ask a group of people to just hold them. We know that it's important, and we are very nice, we're going to help you, but waiting like Turkey in a very difficult conditions with no money and no support and no work permit, because we want to help some other people. Sometimes their political decisions before, that which is very helpful for campaigns and doing, really great jobs, we're going to save people, they have to choose which one and which group is more beneficial. And I think it's one of the issues that we always face when it comes to the refugees, that how sometimes, governments, they can prioritize a group of people over another one. It could be related to their race or religion or sexual orientation, but usually for LGBT refugees, sometimes they tell them that they are priority for governments, but they're not, because while they are being processed, they don't pay enough attention, they don't respond, and they don't respect their relationship, their sexual orientation. They ask them a lot of very private questions in order to just make sure that they are gay or lesbian. Because according to human rights, international law, as long as you say that I'm homosexual, there's no way to prove against it. But they going through a lot of difficult and personal questions to just determine that you're gay or not. Sometimes people were asked to provide their a picture or something which is very romantic, that usually they don't say the word, but they apply that even for the, if you have a sexual and romantic pictures, show it to us in order to believe that you're gay, which is very disturbing and difficult. So I'm going to wrap it up here, and if you have any questions, I would be happy to discuss it more.
Great. Thanks, Archie. And now it's your turn. Great. So we have our next panelist, Alec Butler. Alec Butler is a Canadian playwright and filmmaker. He is a Métis of Mi'kmaq heritage, the author of 8 plays, and was a nominee for the Governor General's Award for English Drama in 1990 for his play Black Friday. He was named one of Toronto's vital people of by the Toronto Community Foundation in 2006 and is the author of the 2014 novella Rough Paradise. Welcome, Alec.
I didn't prepare anything. I'm just going to speak from my heart, I guess, and draw on the ancestors, the strength of the ancestors to guide my words and guide you all to take all our words and go into the future and change the world in this little room. It's happened before, over the years, decades, where a small group of people have changed the world. My experience with the police and the state, well, I remember being, feeling I was a queer when I was very young, when it was illegal. So I remember that feeling of being unacceptable, scared of my own thoughts, stuff like that, like living in a police state. That's what it felt like, being a queer kid in the 60s, early 70s, before the 1969 ruling. And then as a two-spirit mixed Native person, I remember the Wounded Knee occupation in the 70s and being really affected by that and knowing that I was unacceptable as a mixed race person to the state. The state didn't accept me as a person like that either. And then I moved to Toronto, and after the Bathhouse Raids, I moved here in '83. But I was very aware in Cape Breton growing up. I heard about it, was excited by it, by the protests, all that, as a young queer person in my late teens, early 20s. And one of the reasons why I wanted to move here was because, there's other queer people there. The queer people I met in Cape Breton were afraid to be out, afraid to associate with me, or date me, or anything like that. And then I moved here in '83, and was involved at the theater, and did some performances too as a performer, performing very out lesbian hardcore poetry on stage, and feeling very vulnerable doing that. Very vulnerable, to the point of having nightmares for each performance, that someone would stand up and shoot me in the middle of the performance. That's the kind of thing that goes through your head when you grow up in basically feels like a police state. And then trying to organize against that and find some comfort in knowing there are other people out there like me and want to be in community with them. And then on my 30th birthday, I was, me and a couple of friends were walking down the street and we were queer bashed on the street by two men, and I found out about the police. How the police reacted to that was we were arrested for fighting back and had conditions against us. And there was a court case that went on for years, and these people who bashed us said, our cousins are all policemen, so you guys are fucked. And they were right, we were fucked. We got no justice there. And then in the early 90s, I became involved with organizing against the Heritage Front. Don't know if you know about that group. It's a white supremacist group that was very insistent on organizing young kids in high schools. So I became involved in anti-racist action, which some people think is a bunch of black-clad anarchists. Well, some of us were. There were a lot of teachers and educators and housewives and yoga teachers. Everybody. It was kind of an umbrella group for anybody who hated racism and wanted to gather and share ideas about how to fight it. And one of the ways we fought it was in our meetings. We did things through consensus, which we acknowledged in every meeting at the beginning of the meeting that we got this idea from First Nations. First Nations governance is how they how they organize their society is through, and make decisions is through consensus, not voting. So so I witnessed a lot of police action. There is one young Heritage Front member who was in training to be a policeman. So this is a pretty big eye-opener to those of us in our younger years, knowing that there were those connections between white supremacy and the cops, and very much supported, and they're very much protected in the police force. So I witnessed demonstrations where most of the people of color there were the ones who were targeted by the police, who were grabbed by the police, who were thrown down and arrested by the police. Stuff like that. So it was very targeted. So we were very aware that we had to be protective of our people of color comrades. But they were there. They were more fierce than we were. They were like, yeah. So that was in the 90s, so bringing me up to this century. I've been following the DAPL pipeline in North Dakota, all that for the last year and a half, and seeing all the violence there. And it's the outcome of just this very militarization of the police all over the world. And so billions of dollars goes into this militarization, and you're turning these militarized people on their own citizens, which is something that a lot of smart people have been warning about for decades, that they're going to get all this military gear and turn it on their own citizens. Anyway, that's I guess what I have to offer as a mixed two-spirit, mixed race person is decolonizing. As part of decolonizing our lives is to hold the police accountable, make them more transparent, more diverse, I guess, and maybe that'll work. That's all. I guess that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Alan, for sharing that. And our last panelist is Marche Devonish, who is a queer Trinidadian pansexual man who, after decolonizing blackness, colonialism, white supremacy, Peruvian hegemonic masculinity, and racism, has become comfortable being the black guy who thinks too much and asks too many questions. He is the founder, also I did not write that. He is the founder of the Root Collective and is currently studying international development studies and public policy at York University, and his research focuses on marginalized LGBTQ two-spirit healthcare provision from a policy lens. Please welcome. Okay.
Thank you very much for having me today. I've been having a lot of talks recently about the relationship between the Toronto Police Service and law enforcement in general and the queer community, and it's really tiring, and it's something that you're almost expected to speak about sometimes now in white spaces, and I really hope that our non-POC friends and people will recognize that it does take a lot out of us sometimes to constantly speak about this. So excuse us if we get a little bit nervous or anxious or tired or just, jittery when speaking about it. It's not the easiest. So I'm just going to tackle the questions and give my answers. So the first question, what have been your own personal experiences with the police and the justice system? So I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. I moved here about three and a half years ago. The police back home, unfortunately, very classist and also very racist. Except it's divided into like a east East African versus East Indian type race setup. And I was luckily sheltered a lot from the police interactions due to my family and where we lived and being middle upper class. And then moving to Toronto and actually meeting a guy who was introduced me a lot to like Black culture here and academia and just social events that allowed me to really think about my Blackness in a much more decolonized lens. Made me realize that one, growing up in a post-colonial society really allows you to, I mean, you guys go one or the other way. You continue in that post-colonial structure and you study and you go abroad, you get a degree and you come back and you just kind of like further it. And you don't really think too much about why is it that I can't wear my hair the way it grows? Or why is it that I have to speak differently when interacting with an interview? Or why is it that I'm supposed to date a white guy? Or why is it that I'm always like inherently dangerous in situations when I'm the only Black guy? It's like you cannot think about it just as much as it happens, and it happens so often sometimes that you eventually start to think that there must be something wrong with me. And that directly translates into my experiences with the police. For so long, I've had so many friends who've had really terrible interactions with the police. And before I started decolonizing, I'm like, maybe you're just like wearing the wrong clothes, or maybe you're just, maybe you shouldn't hang out here. But then the more and more you think about it, the more and more you realize you have so many friends who all share one common thing, which is their skin color. I'm having terrible experiences with police that seem to be unjustified and seem to be haphazard. And it wasn't limited to my Black friends. My Indigenous friends had very similar experiences. My Muslim friends had very similar experiences. My visibly Muslim friends had similar experiences. My brown friends had similar experiences. And the only friends who didn't have those experiences were my white friends. And dating black men, who would, after parties, feel unsafe walking by themselves and have to walk with groups because they were like, in case the police come and stop us, I want to have someone there who can film or someone who can, bear witness to what may occur. And that eventually rubbed off on me when I hung out with some friends who got stopped by the police, and I saw how the police was interacting with them. And I only got away just because I speak like a white person, which seems ridiculous to say, but articulation and being able to speak with a British accent or to speak English properly sometimes is translated into speaking like a white person. So that privilege of education and language seems to protect me from something that many of my Black friends and Black family members don't get protected from. My experience with the police is just fair. When I see a police car drive by, I'm nervous. When I go to events and there's a lot of police presence, I feel automatically targeted, not sometimes physically, but I feel like I have to be very hyper aware of what I'm doing, what I'm saying. A lot of my, I just took that off. Sorry. A lot of my friends and I, have to be aware of our rights. We don't have the option of not being aware of, not being educated on what our rights are at all times, even when you're doing nothing illegal, which is kind of ridiculous. That's my relationship with police. How's the relationship between the community and the police change over time? So I'm part of the LGBTQ Toronto Police Service Community Consultative Committee, which a lot of people don't know exists, but it's a committee between the police and different communities within Toronto to try to improve the relationship between those communities. So there's one for the Black community, brown community, Muslims, LGBTQ community. And I joined very recently, about three months ago actually, after trying to understand where the decisions made around LGBTQ issues with regards to the police were coming from. Who was when the police said, we spoke to the LGBTQ community, I'm like, which LGBTQ community? Because I don't think you're speaking to the Black queer community. I don't think you're speaking to the Muslim queer community. And if you are, I feel like those conversations are being one-sided. So after joining, I realized that, I mean, I am the only Black person on the committee, which feels amazing. And having those discussions about intersectionality, which should inform all of the LGBTQ conversations that we're having, as Tom and Alec made, and Arsha made so many interesting references to why intersectionality is important. History teaches us quite literally how intersectionality is important with regards to the Bathhouse Raids. So many people stood in solidarity with the Bathhouse Raids. And it's interesting because when you're already marginalized, it's very easy to see, and it's very easy to empathize with other people who are marginalized. And you're like, no, well, I'm being oppressed, so this other person's being oppressed. I'm just going to stand with them because I don't want to be oppressed, and I'm going to hope that they stand with me when I need them. With regards to Indigenous folk, I have so many Indigenous friends. I'm speaking to them about the issues and how the police has interacted with them from the onset. Like, most of us don't know why the police were created. It was created to keep Indigenous people down and to enforce all of these like extremely racist laws regarding Indigenous people. So knowing that history makes you quite hyper aware of, what this institution stands for, why they work, how they work, and how that racism and how that oppression can very easily be translated onto other marginalized communities. So if you're a Black person and you're aware of how the Indigenous relationship between the police has been happening for so long, it's not really hard for you to be like, yeah, they're also racist to Black people. It's not like a, ooh, surprise. It's like, oh, of course. With regards to refugees, a lot of my LGBTQ Caribbean refugees, they get here and they want to assimilate so quickly because they don't want to be seen as the other. Because they know how the police treats the other. And it's not great, trying to speak a different way and trying to like get rid of your culture as quickly as possible so that you can be seen as Canadian. But really, it means you want to be seen as white. Because when you're seen as white, you're normal. When you're seen as white, you are you're the expectation. You're like the starting line. Anything beyond that is adding onto it. You're adding you're Black or you're white and something else, which unfortunately, it's something we have to deal with, right? So with regards to the relationship, I think it's changing very slowly. Unfortunately, I find we have so many conversations with regards to the police, and it seems almost like a Black issue. But the police, not too long ago, were attacking white gays, as he just mentioned. And I think it's really easy to forget when they're not attacking you anymore. You're like, well, I'm safe now, so until you're not safe anymore. So when that happened, when Project Marie happened, and Queers Crash the Beat came through and they asked me to speak and talk to them, I asked them quite literally at the first meeting with my collective member, Ferdinand, who's actually here right now. I was like, why didn't you guys stand up when Black Lives Matter? We're talking about police brutality. Why is it that we had to wait for white men to get arrested for cruising for us to care about police brutality? And it very obviously showed us a hierarchy in how it is the community responds when there's police brutality towards community members. And I think that when we're addressing police brutality and how law enforcement interacts with the queer community, intersectionality is no longer an option, but it has become like a mandate. Because we will forget when we start getting those privileges, when they start listening to us. I am very hyper aware of, as much as I'm being listened to, I do have privilege as a cis, hetero, cis queer man. Because I am not the most disadvantaged. I have black trans friends who won't even really come to these sorts of forums or community talks because they don't feel safe leaving their houses. And that's something I don't really experience. You know, I have black trans friends who would never go to a community consultative community meeting at the Toronto Police Service headquarters because the sight of the police reminds them of constantly being arrested because they may be in sex work or they may have been out at the park late and they were assumed to be doing sex work, which is a reality for many trans POC women. I have 2 minutes, so I'm just going to quickly wrap up. How do you address criminalization? I can go into more detail after. I think policy and research. I'm really interested in my research has to do with policy. I think that protest is important. I think supporting POC people when they protest and stop asking if it's racism. You don't think we know what racism is. We're always dealing with it. I don't think we ever really wanted to be racism. We never try to reach for it. We're never oh my god, this is racism, guys. It's no, we don't want it to be racism. I don't think anyone, it's an uncomfortable topic for both people involved. It's uncomfortable for me because I'm being oppressed. It's uncomfortable for you if you're not necessarily participating in it because you're benefiting from it. So it sometimes just means listening and acknowledging this person being like, hey, this thing that's happening is unfair for me, and I would love if you could use your privilege of being white and being listened to just listen, stop something from happening. I think we need more, more support and funding. My collective supports queer POC artists. There's tons of organizations and collectives that support racialized people in different ways with regards to funding, research, school, art. And I think, conversations are great, but that's we can talk all day. Where's the money? Where's the support? Because that's what we need, and that's what we don't have. Indigenous people don't want to hate you, hashtag no DAPL. Show up to the protests. Write to your MP. Send them money so that they can continue to protest. Black Lives Matter is not just about black lives. It's about all lives that don't really get a say. So sometimes I feel like we get very caught up in people being oh, it's only black lives. And it's the fact that I even have to talk or mention that my life should matter, should tell you where we're at. I think that, to end, I think that we're safe in a situational context. This is to answer the are we safe question. I'm safe situationally. I'm safe when my white partner is around me in white spaces sometimes. I'm safe when I'm with a group of POC people walking somewhere and someone says something racist and we have to choose if to react because, as you know really well, sometimes you're the one who's going to get incarcerated even if you didn't do anything. It's tiring to continue to speak about this because I feel like every time I say it, I have to always justify it or prove it. We're hearing so many of us say it, so I don't understand what else I would really need to do to prove that something's happening to us that may not be happening to you if you're white. And it's not really about not being against white people. I think we all just need to be together. It's consensus and understanding that sometimes being present and just making space for other people, you're not gonna lose anything. This whole thing about white people just suddenly being the minority and everyone hating on them, let's take a break. Let's dismantle racism first. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. So I think having some honest conversations and listening and consensus and working together to understand experiences and lived experiences that we may not have. And POC people also have to do that. My experience is very different from Southeast Asian experience, but we're still similar because we're being oppressed. I don't have a lived experience of a trans black person or an indigenous two-spirited person, but I can shut up and listen when they're speaking to me so that I could try to understand it. And then when we're having talks like this, be able to put those people first, put them at the forefront, so that they can explain what's happening to them, because we can. I think the objective of this event should be, for those of us who don't have those lived experiences, to listen and to try to understand them so that we can apply solutions that are very tangible in our everyday lives and in organizations. Because I think that's the only way that there's going to be some sort of progress. And we need progress because some of us are dying. So yeah.
And I'd like to thank all the panelists for sharing their work and research in the community, and because sharing these personal narratives and personal implications with the police, encounters with the police, differential profiling by the police is work. That sharing those stories is work. And so before we begin the World Cafe part of the discussion, we want to implicate everyone in the audience with a poll to share their own potential encounters with the police as well. So by a show of hands, if you'd like to participate, who here has experienced police brutality or profiling? Thank you. The next one is, who here knows of someone who experienced police brutality or profiling? Who has been carded? Who has a university level education? Who lives in the downtown core? And who lives in the suburbs? Okay, so I guess that gets the ball rolling, but for those of you who don't know what a World Cafe style is, as I did not yesterday, the World Cafe is a method that's often used to efficiently harvest the ideas of many people in a limited amount of time. Each table will have one person volunteer, so someone has to volunteer, as the designated table host, and I'm giving you 30 seconds now to choose a host. And if you're sort of at a table by yourself, maybe join another table to...
Can you say what being a host entails?
Oh, yes. Before you decide on that responsibility, this person will stay at their table for the entire duration of the World Cafe, and will be responsible for writing down on the Post-its as much as they can of what is being said around the table. Everyone is encouraged to also draw and write their thoughts on the butcher paper and Post-its on the table at any time. For each of the 2 rounds, everyone should get a chance to speak, addressing the discussion questions or what they have heard from the panel at the end of the round, and I will say when. Everyone but the table host, so the table host stays, everyone will get up, except for the table host, and go to another random table in the room. Feel free to bring your belongings, and the table hosts will then explain to the new members of the table what was said in the last round so as to minimize the amount of repetition. And after a round of 15 minutes, volunteers will come by to collect the Post-its and bring it to the sorting wall over there for organizing into conceptual groups. And after 2 rounds, there will be time for a break. When we reconvene, the host will share one important original point they've heard throughout the rounds. So that is what the host does. Can we get some water?
Yes, absolutely.
And now if everyone has, and the panelists will participate.
If people want to get a coffee or water now,
Feel free.